welcome you to, I'll formally welcome you to this very special evening where we get to launch the wonderful Sam Hodder's podcast. This is our time version 2. I'll just take a moment to acknowledge country, which we do in Australia. I'll recognise the Wurundjeri people of the Woiwurrung Nation, which is where Homeward Bound lives, its administration lives, and where I live, close by. Recognise the elders, custodians of land, past, present and emerging, a particularly important one in the light of this launch of podcast, as it represents in many ways the voices of women who are here tonight. And we honour the earth and we try to get it into our bodies so that we own the planet as home, doing what we can to create a sustainable future. So, reflections on the voyage, very, very briefly. You know, I think for me, this voyage was the one where I think I would say I felt personally most at home. I think it was the voyage where we all accepted each other and our greatness and our weaknesses, our opportunities and our places of learning. And I think that's particularly relevant tonight as we get to hear about the famous, some might say infamous, Rothera Gate, which I know many people for some years were convinced that the faculty, or me in particular, had contrived. And that wasn't the case. It was just one of those magic moments that in a lifetime as a leader, you recognise defining moments in your journey. So let's pass to Louise to listen to a story. Let's make the story together.
I'm here to present 3 critical pieces of information about something. It's been studied all over the world. It's been written about in peer academic reviewed journals. Stories have 3 parts. There's a beginning, which is at the beginning. There's a middle, and something happens there. And then there's an end. Okay, now we're back to that beginning thing I wanted to remind you about. And here's where I need your help, because we're going to make a story together. So what I'm going to do is divide the room into 3 sections. This first bank here, you're the beginning. The middle bank, you're the middle. And guess what? The end, you're the end. And now I need a few of you volunteers to write 10 words that could form part of a story. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then I will do my best to randomly and lovingly select just one of you to share your story with the rest of the world. Anyone in the beginning ready to share? Laura, let's hear it.
In the beginning, there was a man and a woman.
I love the beginning of a story, but now it's time to move on to the middle because we know there are 2 characters established. Now we're moving on to the middle. Is anyone able to share something about the middle? Now, Kathy, I know you wrote something down and you may be a little bit hesitant to share your story with us, but can I convince you to share it with us?
I wrote, the dog went into the woods and peed on a tree.
I am fascinated to know how this all works out because something has just happened and we need a volunteer to conclude the story at the end of the room here. Anyone? Yes, Beck.
He assumed her role as CEO and lived happily ever after.
I do love it when a good story comes to an end. I share this with you not to tell you that I can make a story up out of absolutely anything, which I probably could, but rather to tell you that there's stories inside of all of us, and together we're going to work together to make a beautiful story to share with the rest of the world. Thank you.
That is a very wonderful moment. I've completely not thought about that since the night And I rushed back to, or the afternoon, I rushed back to that moment in time. And on that note, I'm going to invite Sam to share a little bit of her story. What was her experience like, a little bit about the podcast experience and the things that were part of your story of gratitude. So Sam, what was the HP experience like for you?
Hi, everyone. First of all, wow, it's really lovely to see faces that I recognize, and really exciting to meet some new people who I haven't met in person yet, but nice to be here in community. And I am actually on the Ojibwe territory of the people of Curve Lake. They're about 3 lakes over, so just to recognize my place in this world. Really exciting to be here, and this cracks me up, this story, because I was so stressed out getting ready to do this this symposium at sea. I remember spending like hours and hours thinking, what the hell am I going to say to all of these scientists about what I do? I don't have data. I don't have any way to explain what everybody knows how to do, which is tell stories and reflect on their experiences. And am I any better than anyone else? I don't know, I'll give it a go. And so I thought I'll just put my tongue firmly in my cheek and proceed thusly, which I guess I've continued to do. And I think that moment that I shared was really important to me, because it helped me to communicate to everyone on the ship that I'm making the story. I'm the person behind the scene, but I wouldn't have been able to make it without everyone here. I wouldn't have been able to tell the story without all of everyone's vulnerability, without the experience of being there, and without the trust that I can then go away and craft that into something that might make a bit of sense. Because when you get home from this big experience, you have, days and hours and thousands of film hours of whatever. And to explain it to people, probably people said, so how was it? And you basically said, it was great. It was awesome. But that doesn't really get into the heart of the matter. And you have to find some entry point to get in there. And when the Rothera moment began to unfold, it was a funny thing, which I'll share with you as the resident storyteller here, that there was a lot of stress and anxiety and worry and confusion. And I was feeling all of that. But then when people would say, so how are you? I'd say, I am great. And people would be like, what? I'm like, well, because there's something happening. Now I understand where the story starts. Now I understand how you frame it. Now I understand how you connect this to the outside world, because in a story, you need something really like an explosion to happen. You need an event that then connects with other people, and it has an emotional arc. It has a way for people to connect. And so that was what this moment was for me. It made me, I realized in the moment that this was going to be it. So then I kind of woke up, and at that point worked about 20 hours a day to kind of figure out what it all was and put it together. So and yeah, what was that experience? It took probably like everyone, it took a long time to figure out what that experience was. You go to a place that you maybe never thought you were going to go to. And some of us have been more than once, which is even crazier to imagine. And then you come back, and it just takes a whole bunch of time to let that settle, and to be able to reflect on that, and to really realize what Antarctica is in your mind and in your heart. And it really gets into your soul. There's a lovely clip of Greg, which I think is coming up in episode 4, where he says, somebody asked him, so how do you leave Antarctica? And he said, well, I've left Antarctica a lot of times. And if you think you're going to get out of here without being affected by it, it's too late for you. It's already all the way inside of you, and you're all affected by it. So just go easy. Be easy on yourself. Walk slowly. Look at the trees. Just relax into it, and just think slowly about it. And it was interesting to come across that piece of tape in this moment where I was trying to kind of wind down the story and trying to figure out how to get off the ship and bring everyone out of the story. And I was like, of course, Greg has the little sage piece of advice that reminds us that it's just, there isn't a lot of work to do because it's already inside of you, and you walk away and you take it with you, and it comes up quite often, as I've learned, this experience of what it means to you and where you take it, it comes up. And I live in the Northern Hemisphere, so we're on the opposite COVID schedule, but where you're all in right now in COVID lockdown, that's where I spent all of last winter. And when I went into that COVID cave, I brought the story with me because I couldn't get it off my mind. It was really sort of stuck in there. And then I had this moment where I thought, I've done this before. I've been there. I've lived this. How did this go? Like, how do I get out of this misery and confinement and confusion? And I realized the story of being in that moment where everything felt like it was both breaking apart and growing in the same moment, and you didn't understand it. And that was kind of what the story meant for me. And I realized that this was the way to share it with the world, because then they connect to it even more. And really everybody connects, because everybody is going through it in different ways and in different places. And that was really what helped me finish it. That's what compelled me to get through it. And the fact that I could help connect this strange, very unique, very actually short experience when you think about it, with the rest of the world, who's going through something that's definitely not a 24-hour experience or a few days or whatever, however you compound it. So yeah, that was kind of how I sum it up, that the world's events kind of compelled me to get to the end of it and to share it with everyone and to find a way that it made sense. And yeah, that's.
So not everyone would know this. In the middle of all this, in fact, before you started trawling your way through the hundreds of hours of recordings that you had a pretty big personal event.
Yes. I sort of divided into three. Before I got on the ship, I had a pretty difficult experience, and probably I worked hard to control this while on board, but I arrived in a bit of a broken state because I had a really challenging experience when I was finishing the end of the season 1 and getting it out into the world. And that, all of your love and support and compassion from everyone, and the really overwhelming support that I felt when I was there, is what helped me get through it. I arrived not expecting that. I arrived expecting to have the opposite. So to kind of ease into that. And then we went away and we had this amazing experience.
Without a suitcase. Hold on. Without a suitcase.
Yeah, that's right. I arrived without a winter jacket or anything. Yeah, that was a little bit on the nose. I thought that I was wondering, should I be here at all? And then my suitcase takes 5 days to arrive. So it's a bit of a moment. Thankfully it did. And then we go on the ship. We have this amazing experience. I have a lovely trip with my family. I get home. I'm just starting to figure it all out. It's just starting to make itself clear. And in the meantime, I'd been to New York City. I connected with Fabian. I actually met her son, who gave me this idea to work with a screenwriting concept, which helped me to piece the story together. And I'm starting to line up meetings, and I go to Chicago. I do a really big pitch. It's a really big success. I come home. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to work. I'm sitting at my desk, literally on what I would sort of consider the first day of work, and my house burns down on that day. And I'm sitting at my desk as I'm realizing this is happening. Luckily, my children are all at school, and I'm at home with my dog, and I realize I have to run out of my house, which is now burning. And what am I going to take? Like, what am I going to take? And in that moment, I basically grabbed 3 things. I grabbed my dog under my arm. I grabbed my computer, my hard drive, and I grabbed my purse, which I knew had my passport in it because I'd just been away. And then it was a 1.5 years of hell of trying to fight with the insurance company and manage what it was like to lose basically 90% of everything you own. Went in the garbage. The house basically went in the garbage, and 2019 just went in the shitter. Like, there was nothing to salvage from that. And then I thought, okay, finally, all that hard work, everything, I just sort of let it go. And I thought, 2020, it's time to get home. We moved back. And by the time I sat down to unpack my boxes, sat down, time to work, it was basically February 1st of 2020. And I had about 3 weeks before I started to realize that things were not going very well. And I had a whole other launch plan. I had a whole thing that I'd connected with a bunch of people about. I had a whole plan. And then I guess kind of getting towards the end of February, I realized, and then I couldn't concentrate like a lot of people, like what's going on in the world, what's happening. And then of course, March arrives and the world is locked down into the COVID crazy beginning. And I just had to stop working because I didn't know how to interface with the world. I didn't know how to tell a story in this space. I didn't know what to do. And so my instinct at that point was just put your head down, just sit down and work. Everyone all over the world is going through this. I need to just be quiet, and no one's asking me to do anything. No one's looking for anything. The world is just kind of confused. And that's sort of what I did, and plodded around for a few months in the fall. And then it was really, and kind of, figured it out. But then it was when lockdown started for me, which was in basically December of 2020, and then the winter 2021, those intense 6 months, basically January to June. And I just did it. And I just had to finish it. I kept kind of trying to quit. I kept trying to say, well, at one point I'm like, I'll just do one episode. And then I made one episode. I'm like, oh, but I forgot this and I forgot that and I forgot this. And then I just started expanding, and it was like the file now was about an hour and a half long. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. How do you cut these episodes? How do you make it? Like, let's make sure the story arc works. So it was not without a whole lot of challenge to get to this point. But I think that's really, what everyone's going through. And my challenges are specific and unique to me, but they're not unique. Everyone has challenges. Everyone's going through a lot. Everyone's got their own things that they're battling with. And, I wanted just to get to the end for a sense of completion and really to honor this story and this place and all of you. So here we are.
So Sam, it's a wonderful story of courage and perseverance. I'm also mindful that you did it with no money and with your son's help on sound and music. So we honour him in his absence. Let's listen to the trailer.
Sure.
Louise. She looks dangerously like she's frozen from my end of the world. Louise?
I think she's frozen.
She's definitely frozen, isn't she?
Mm.
She could be loading it.
We're concentrating, but she's muted.
She's looking pretty good for someone who's frozen.
Yeah, freeze funny.
Mm.
You're not next door. You can't go and poke her, Fabian.
No, I can't. She's not answering her phone.
She's been replaced by a doppelganger.
Probably on mute. Mine goes on mute after 10.
Yeah, same here. Well, in her absence, one of the things we'll do, we'll go on to the panel and we'll hear the trailer after the panel. Sam, I'm sorry about that. But Sam chose to rightly capture the moment when efforts to get to Rothera were being thwarted by the ice. And I'll never know what fair winds or foul caused us to bring to you the vote to go or not to go to Rothera. And you're not to know, of course, because you weren't there, the incredible behind-the-scenes complexity that went on and the struggle that the faculty had in the decision to go to sea. My personal belief that one of the great gifts that women bring to the world is our spirit of inclusion and care for each other, and that at the very best, we don't leave people behind. I spent a lot of time over a couple of years with Greg Mortimer, and I know that in mountaineering, one thing you don't do when you're climbing a mountain is leave someone behind. You're either able to do it with the team or not, and that there's danger for those who are left behind and there's danger for those who march ahead. And that there's too much leadership in our world, which is about what I do and what I have and what I own and create, and not enough about what we do and the legacy we leave. So when we put the vote to you, it was in the belief that the women would actually have the power to make the right decision. And then a terrible thing happened when we ran the blind vote, which was the shorthand way of seeing the mood in the room. it wasn't actually about a democratic vote. It was to test what was the mood in the room. And what we found is there were enough people who didn't want to go to make the decision still a hard decision. Not because so many did want to go, but because enough didn't want to go. And they were afraid of being sick, of being out in very rough water. And of course, if you don't get badly motion sick, it's hard to fathom how horrible that experience is. But we understood it. And so we went back again. And I personally felt that we just couldn't go if everyone was not in favour of it. So we came back and we made that decision. And we should have predicted, but didn't, that it would actually upset everybody. Everybody was upset. So those who planned on going to Rothera were upset because we weren't, and felt that the faculty had in some way misled them. We shouldn't have had a blind vote. We shouldn't have made that was the expedition leader's call. It shouldn't have come to the women. It was a majority. The majority should have won. And the ones who didn't want to go were miserable. They were crying. You remember that? That was like they felt as if they were to blame. Everything calmed down that night and everyone eventually went to bed. And you remember overnight those amazing things happened for so many people. And in the morning, poetry and prose came into our open frame. And grace and kindness and generosity, and the realisation that in that moment, the night before, everybody had been triggered. You know, your LSIs came to life, or people's LSIs came to life. And then the miracle of, in that insane environment, which, by the way, we've never been able to get to before or after that far south, we were able to go out in the zodiacs, and you remember the orcas and the exquisite experience of watching the orcas fish, two families. And then all hugging each other and loving each other and saying, this has been such a special experience. It wouldn't have happened if we'd gone to Rothera. And lo and behold, we come back on the ship, and indeed the winds at Marguerite Bay had changed and we were able to go. And it was a calm transit, relatively speaking, to Rothera. So that's the experience that Sam captured in this series. And what I'd like to do is, we've got Sarah Hamilton, we've got Paola Tello, we've got Fern Wixon, and we've got Sophie Adams. And I'm going to go to Sarah first. A little bit from you, Sarah. What was that trip like for you and that moment in time?
Yeah, so I suppose the trip was an amazing trip. We were there for, was it 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Moving out and then docking. And I remember I just reread something that I'd written about Rothera Gate just this evening. And it's funny, I was thinking to myself as Sam was describing the experience, when did...
Sophie, I'll get you to mute yourselves just while... Thank you, darling. Sorry, Sarah.
That's all right. Can you guys hear me okay? I was pondering when Rothera Gate started, and I was actually remembering something that I haven't thought of since the trip, which was on day 13, and I think it was the evening of day 13 that things started to kick off and we entered the gullet and there was a lot of ice. I remember the lunch, I don't know if you guys remember, the people who were there remember that we were eating lunch and we started singing after lunch, which was quite unusual. Like, we hadn't done it at all in the trip. And at that point, I think Fabian said, look, 77 women on a boat, day 13, it's something dramatic's going to happen. So I think, to some extent, it's something dramatic, like Rothera Gate was it, but if it wasn't Rothera Gate, it might have been something else, right? Maybe that's just to do with the sort of social construction of events on women on boats, I don't know. But more broadly, I mean, reading through the thing that I wrote, I think Fabian's probably covered most of the points that I was going to think of in terms of the big lessons that came out of that moment. And for me, yeah, the meat on the bones of that trip was all about the days over which Rothera Gate occurred. And it was nice in the sense that if you sort of go beyond the focus of the decision making about whether or not to go outside where people might experience seasickness, or to sort of, you know, explore calmer waters, we really did have our cake and eat it, in the sense that we sort of chose option A, we explored the calmer waters, we saw orcas the following morning, we got the calm experience, and then when we got back on the boat, it was pretty much instantaneous that Fabian and Greg said, well, actually, things have calmed down and we're going to Rothera anyway. So then we went to Rothera. We had a great visit at the research station, and then we had the whole experience of breaking through the ice on the way back. And for a while, I think a few of us genuinely believed that we might get stuck in the ice, and we didn't, and we enjoyed metaphors about breaking the glass ceiling. And that was just really lovely that we took this really sort of unwieldy approach to making the decision about whether or not to go to Rothera, but we all felt like we sort of owned it, and we all engaged, and we had that lovely extended discussion about whether or not we ought to go. And I think we all felt quite involved. And then ultimately, over the course of sort of 3 or 4 days across which that experience stretched, we had a great time, and I think we won on multiple levels, and that was lovely to experience, especially with you guys. I can see in your faces, your smiling faces, that you enjoyed the experience as well. Yeah, I think beyond that, I think Fabian's probably covered the things that I was going to talk about. So I just wanted to also say how fantastic I think Sam is for having brought this to completion. I think about a year on from the trip, my partner had a conference in Toronto, so we found ourselves in Toronto, and I found myself, I took our young boys round to Sam's house, and she did us a lovely dinner, and I was sitting at her sort of kitchen breakfast bar, and we were drinking wine, and we were sort of deconstructing Rothera Gate, and there was this great moment where I think the kids had decided it was quite chaotic. There were lots of young children around, and Willis, the famous dog, and the pizza guy arrived. That was it. The pizza guy arrived. The kids were all excited about the fact that their pizza was coming. Sam sort of got up from midway through our conversation. We were quite at a sort of a deep point discussing the lessons to be learned from Rothera Gate, and Sam sort of got up and did the most amazing robot walk through the middle of the chaos that was going on to the front door. She had kind of a kid hanging off one arm. She scooped up her purse with the other arm, paid for the pizza, scattered the pizza, came back to the kitchen, picked up her glass of wine, and just continued exactly where she left off, and dropped a really good point about Rothera Gate that I hadn't thought of, and it was really insightful. And I thought, wow, that was just brilliant. That's Sam to a T, really, that there's all of this stuff going on, and you've produced something that's kind of really sort of hit the nail on the head. So kudos to you, Sam Hodder. Well done. All right, I'll pass on to whoever's next in the panel at this point.
A wonderful and evocative telling, Sarah. Thank you. We'll go to Paola, because you also had a pretty extraordinary experience in that trip, and I think we shared quite a big story with you. So how about, what was that trip like for you and the penguins?
Yes, I just want to mention something about Rothera, that the next day I went to see whales with Greg, and I asked Greg, we need a plan B, we need to go. And he looked at me and smiled and said, we have a plan B, and I have a slide, and scientists love slides. And then in the afternoon, he come back and put on a slide, and it's a map with the temperatures that change and say, we save, but look at the image. And I was just laughing. It's like, this man. And was exactly what Sam was saying. I didn't have data, but Greg was very smart and got the data and convinced everyone and make them feel safe. That's my story. And about the penguins, fantastic, Greg. About the penguins, yes. As you were all involved, that was really moving moment for many of us, because it was this idea that the words of the children were listened by penguins in Antarctica, and Sam recorded perfectly, and it's just beautiful, the quantity of audios that we have with all of you, with your voices, with different languages. We still haven't used properly, but every time that we talk about it, people just get impressed, like, you really did that. And I see it like normal because I was part of it, but when you look from outside, it is amazing. And I think it's the same with all these friendships that we have on this trip and this experience. We see like, oh yeah, was Antarctic was a big deal, but it was bigger than. Sometimes it's just really fantastic that we have all this experience.
Particularly in the light of COVID and the uncertainty of being able to go again, it's even more precious in that context. Sophie, what was it like for you? And you've come back again since, so what was it like for you?
Well, I think I've probably told you lots of times, Phoebe, but I think it was an absolutely wonderful opportunity in mid-career to reflect and think. And I think there are many things that I've gained that have led me to the role that I'm in now, which is mostly effortless, because it is about managing competing moving parts and competing people with their lots of opinions, and it's so automatic doing that now after all the time I've had with Homeward Bound that I can kind of just do it automatically without even thinking about it and be open and curious most of the time, and you know, it's been fantastic. I think the thing about Rothera Gate was it's so memorable because it was this sort of clash of the belief that we could collectively make decisions together and the encouragement for people to think in that way versus the sort of capacity for many of us who were participating who've never really had the opportunity to have a collective or distributed leadership to participate in a way that we felt kind of okay about. So there are a lot of people doing it for the first time. I think that's part of why it was a bit intense and overwhelming. And I also think you don't really know how good your psychological safety is until you put it under pressure like that. And it's one of the things that we took away from that, and that Phoebe knows we worked on very hard to try and improve for the future cohorts. And I think we now do psychological safety set up really very well, and it has been able to sustain through challenges in ways that I think allow people to be more resilient when they are faced with this sort of new experience of collective decision making. And the other thing I get from all of this is, the persistence and redemption and the continuing to work for the greater good that Fabian did, even though that was a pretty tricky and difficult experience, that she kept trying, she kept going, she kept using words like joyous and brave and love and care and just continued. And I think I certainly admire people who are true to their values in that way, that they can persist and has persisted for years now. I think it's probably getting a bit easier, is it, Phoebe?
Don't push me on that one yet, Sophie. It's been quite a wild ride for the last 18 months. I think one of the things that was always apparent to me, by the way, is that you brought all those capabilities from the moment we met you, and I think it's been a great privilege to have you on the faculty, and the calmness and kindness, and I have to confess, because I'm biased, a sort of delicious format quadrant fourness to the way we operate, which is deeply valued by those.
Don't tell anyone, I'm not supposed to be one.
Yeah, you are though. So last but by no means least, the lovely Fern. And forever we are wedded to your voice upon the ship and connecting us to the ocean below and the sky above, as we did the weirdest version ever known to mankind of yoga.
Thanks, Phoebe, and a huge thanks to Sam for reflecting this trip back to us in her own special voice and unique style at this point in time where I think, that world feels so far away, not just Antarctica, but where women from all around the world could gather and be in one place in a confined ship for weeks at a time. That feels like a whole other universe that once upon a time existed on this planet. And I just love having it reflected back to us at this time and the joy of that trip, and to honor, how difficult the journey's been for you to deliver it. And I think I recognize the difficulty because there was not one story from that voyage. There is 1,000 million stories that could have been told, that were told, that are being told, and that you had to create a podcast that wanted to accurately capture and reflect the richness of that voyage with limited time and one story and one arc. And I can just empathize with trying to find the right one and how, and this moment is special and unique. And so props to you for pulling it together. I'm so proud of you, and I love listening when they come out, and I can't wait for the next ones. But I also think, I mean, for me, it's important to remember the world is not binary. We love to think in binaries, and it's very helpful to think in binaries. But for me, you know, even Phoebe was telling you, we made everyone upset, both the people who wanted to go and the people who didn't want to go. And I wasn't in either of those camps. I couldn't have cared less. Go, don't go. I don't give a shit. I'm in Antarctica and it's beautiful and I really don't care. Rothera, no Rothera, it's irrelevant to me. So I actually abstained from the boat. I really genuinely did not care. Go, don't go, I don't care. And so even though we set up the world in black and white, and those who wanted to go and those who didn't want to go, there's all those shades in between. And I think it's important to remember that. And also that for me, Rothera Gate wasn't even the major gate in the voyage for me. I mean, it was a big moment, but because I wasn't wedded to going or not going, and I know people were, there were very strong opinions, and I honor those in the room. I just wasn't one of them. For me, the big dramatic moment was actually around how we engaged with the staff on the ship, and the conversation that came up around that, particularly from the Spanish-speaking community. And I had conversations with some of them over a dinner, but when that came up into a plenary and the challenges of that and how you create community, and that anytime you create community, you're excluding others. Identity is always me and an other. There's always an othering in an identity creating. But also we had psychological safety because of the exclusion. It was linked to a history. It was a rich and diverse and difficult debate, and continues to be within Homeward Bound. How do we create community and exclude or include her? And things. So for me, I mean, if I'd have been telling the story, it might have been Staff Gate or, you know, Expedition Gate or something. And I think that's the idea, that there were so many possible stories. But I'm loving seeing Rothera Gate through your eyes, and mostly because it brings back very visually and very vividly to me that moment of transversing through the ice. And that was just something that I think will live with me forever. It was so special and so beautiful. And so if we had to go through Rothera Gate to get that experience, I'd do it every day of the week and twice on Sundays. But it's just lovely to see all your faces. I'm so happy to see all my sisters, and even the ones I don't know, welcome to the call. But sisters from HV2, it's lovely to see you all.
Beautiful summary, Fern. Yes, absolutely. The defining interactions between staff and participants, that was a really important part of that trip as well. Absolutely beautifully raised. And yes, the polarization doesn't help us. We're on a scale, you know, it's a grey scale. So thank you for those wise words. I think now that Louise is back and unfrozen, it might be a really lovely thing if we could hear the trailer, Louise.
In 2018, I joined an all-women's leadership expedition to Antarctica as podcaster in residence. 21 days at sea. 21 days at sea. Our trip plan had been to get all the way to the Rothera Research Station, part of the British Antarctic Survey, a place that's so remote, it's almost an illusion.
Good morning, Possums. We're in the right place at the right time.
But we had a problem.
If we want to go to Rothera, it requires us to go into open water tonight.
Now we had to choose. Do we risk going out into the open waters with weather coming in and just go for it? Or do we give up on our hopes and dreams and turn around and head for home? But maybe the strangest thing was that this was actually a question on a ship in the middle of Antarctica.
We've made a decision to bring a vote to you all, which is not common in this sort of context.
And this vote, this approach, it changed everything.
is downstairs basically having a full-scale panic attack.
Is it just we'll be rolling a bit, but it's perfectly safe and this boat has navigated those conditions hundreds of times before?
For me, this is really anxiety provoking. We are resilient and we can do something new.
Because now it wasn't just a trip, it was an experience.
So we are simply going to say, I'll do a show of hands who would like to go, and then a show of hands who would prefer not to go. And I'd like it to be, I would recommend it's blind because I don't want anyone isolated for the choices that they make.
And I was there recording all of it.
Great leadership moment. Would you do it? Did you think it was a good thing to do?
No, fuck.
No. And it's still a shit fight going on.
Yeah.
There was 8 people who didn't want to go.
And it occurred to me that what I went through there is a little bit like what we've gone through this year during the pandemic. So I want to share the story with you because I think there's something in there for you too.
I've had a lot of colleagues that have been trapped in the sea ice.
Because if I've learned anything, it's that we actually do have the choice to decide what it all means and where we go from here.
It's lifetime experience for myself, and I'm not going back.
I'm not a political scientist, but there are lots of different ways of doing democracy, aren't there? That didn't strike me as a democratic approach, what happened.
To find out what happens, subscribe to this 5-part audio verite adventure. It's an emotional odyssey to the end of the world. I'm Samantha Hodder, and this is Our Time. Subscribe today.
Wonderful, a wonderful trailer. So maybe we'll just open it up to the room, reactions, thoughts, reflections, those who have been, those who were in another year yet to go. Anyone want to make an observation or share a comment or a memory?
Could I start with a question now that I'm back from that frozen disaster right at the very moment?
That critical moment.
That critical moment. Sam, how many hours of audio did you have from the voyage?
Oh, how many hours of audio? I haven't counted it, but I would ballpark it at 100 hours because there were 21 days on the ship plus 5 days in Argentina, plus a bunch of follow-up interviews that I did online and in person. I said over 100 because that's a conservative guess for sure. And did I listen to all of it all over again? No, but I did. When I was on the ship, I was making a spreadsheet that had all of the files there and some bullet points to help me remember it. And then I journaled in my book to help me tweak the memory. And so when I would listen through it, I would go, and this was something I did that was quite soul replenishing this winter. I would go back to the landings and just listen to the raw tape, like 2 hours of walking on Deception Island and an hour and a half of walking on what were some of the other ones, or the Zodiac landing. Anyway, so a lot. And then, to Fern's point, yes, you're right. There could have been 1,000 ways to tell this story. And then, but you're sort of trapped because you need all of the bits of a story plot to make it make sense. And the tape has to be the right time. It has to work. It has to connect. So you sort of narrow down your choices at some point because there's milestones you have to meet in the story, and then the tape has to meet those milestones. And so, there's a giant cutting room floor of stories that I couldn't tell, and stories that didn't fit, or stories I wanted to tell but I ran out of time. So that's part of what I started my newsletter for, is to share that. So I'm once a week sending out audio love to anyone who's on the newsletter, and that's really that's the backstory. That's the little bits and pieces that couldn't get in. That's the part that makes the other thing make sense. And so that's where it was. I forget what you even asked. I just got thinking about being there again.
Katerina, because I don't know if we can see your face, Katerina, but you will be looking forward to the possibility of going sometime in the future. and we don't know when that will be. Have you got a question you would like to ask of any of the people that have been, and of Sam? You've got a wonderful collection of people here. You've got 2 members who've been actually participants and who are now faculty. You've got an amazing selection of women who've been, and you've got the podcasters. So is there anything as a bit of a special treat for you? And you can speak, you can really speak much at the moment, sorry for this, but just listening to the stories is great. Oh, can't. Okay, darling, sorry about that. If you have a burning, you're sick or just can't speak? Somebody's sleeping.
No, I think you don't hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, you do. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the stories. It's really always, I think, good to take that time as well for everybody who's still newer to this to just listen into what has been happening. And I think, Karen, if I'm not mistaken, we actually had a conversation before I applied, which is also really nice to see.
Well, one day
We did.
This is your story. One day your story. Any other questions you would like to ask? Yeah, Sophie. You're mute.
Through the pandemic, I'd be good with mute, but anyway, this is a frivolous question. Do you have the day that the seal chased the penguin and we all stood on the boat, and there was lots of yelling and being David Attenborough? Do you have that audio?
And then finally, MA's quiet voice saying, "The seal is lonely." Remember that? It was a Weddell seal, it wasn't a hunting seal.
Yeah, Amari was saying the seal cannot make the distance.
Yes, that's right.
I remember that was right when we were passing through the ice at the end.
You don't have that.
I wonder if I do. I might, it's this breaking through the ice moment. It's really funny because I wanted to include that, but when I went back and listened to the files, it was really oblique and kind of hard to it was hard to convey that in the story. And this breaking through the ice was a big moment for us, but it didn't translate in the audio, so it's sort of not part of the story.
That sort of silence, Paola.
Also a frivolous question, but Sam, what is a good voice and what is a bad voice in a podcast, and how you can differentiate that and how you can teach us for the future?
What a big question.
Well, everyone's a good voice. Everyone. I mean, sometimes the sound quality was bad because you were sitting next to a loud generator, or there was wind, or there was someone in the background. So like often you can't use files even though you want to, because it's just, it doesn't really work. Like I had a lot of files, a lot of conversations that I taped in the common room, but they're really hard to use that much of because it's very noisy. And the way the microphone works is it picks up everything. And so you shove it in someone's face and they're more clear, but the background audio is challenging. You can't eliminate it. So, but always people who are just sharing and being honest and catching people off guard or not off guard, but before they kind of realize, like, that someone's recording them. That's the part that's great. And little candid moments. Like there's a beautiful one coming up in episode 4 with Ellen and Nicole Fetchett. And I walked into the room, and it was like, it's action. You always want action tape. And so I walked into the room and there was all this hubbub, and I honestly didn't know what was going on. And I came upon them and I said, "Hi, what's going on?" And Nicole's like, "Oh, you're not going to believe it. There's going to be a vote." I said, "Oh, what? I don't even know what the vote's about. I don't know. Ellen, what's it about?" And it's like, kind of like the tape kind of rolls out and you're like, whoa, whoa. And so you whenever you have a scene play out and someone is describing what's going on and someone's just being honest and kind of comical and fun, and when you read the transcript, it doesn't actually sound very articulate, but it's wonderful to listen to because it sounds real. So that's one of the things I look for in the tape.
And that's the verite of the series, the truthfulness of the series. Yes, Sarah, go for it.
Sam, I have a question for you about the deeper insights that you can draw out of the Rothera Gate experience. And feel free to say no, because you don't want to give away the nuggets of wisdom from your podcast, if you like. But I suppose listening to Vern talk, I was thinking, well, in a sense, whether or not we wanted to go to Rothera in that moment was irrelevant, because there were so many things that you could draw from that story and parallels that I think you've hinted at already in episode 3 of your podcast. And what were the big insights that you drew from the story?
Sam, you can answer that in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. And I think it's all around this notion of a transformative learning experience. And that's what I wanted to get across, because that's what I feel like I've been through, frankly, over and over again in the last few years. And when you come out of that moment, you realize, oh, I've got some things to share about being in here. And that was what, and you know, that transformative learning experience has to have a lot of details to it to share. And I realized that I did have to explain. There were many transformative learning experiences, but this was a very tangible way to help and explain it to people. And that is very much how I've been feeling for the last 6 months. And so that I'm going to dive into that. You'll get there, but that's where it's going.
Well, we might say to everyone who's here tonight, thank you for coming. To honour Sam's journey to tell the story and share with us some small part of the incredible audio that she gathered on that trip. I have memories of sharing a room with Sam and watching her calmly manage the fact that she had lost her luggage and was saying goodbye to her family, and then running down to Australia to try and get a few bits and pieces. And I thought, what a beautiful young woman she was, and that it always had felt with Sam from early on that she was the right person to help tell our story when she was ready. So we have one last little clip, I think, to send us out in either to the day, if it's the beginning of your Wednesday, or to bed if it is well and truly time to be asleep, which it truly is for some of you, myself included. So here's a last little sound to wish you a thank you and a goodbye, and a big hug to Sam for what she's done.
I'm having a real rock star night tonight, aren't I?
You are?
Yeah, I can think of the key points of sort of the first iceberg and that first feeling. That felt like I was in Antarctica, but then I keep having these experiences quite often when I think, no, this is Antarctica. No, this is Antarctica. Whether it's the seeing more wildlife, whether it's because the landscape changes the further you go, it changes. And it seems, and I have to find more words to describe this, and it's actually something from being here is a thought that I need to better understand the first feelings of awe. Yeah, it took actually a lot for me to get my head around the fact that I was coming here. So I can, some ways it did and some ways it didn't. So I can go back to books, my creative writing jotters. I don't know if you use that word, we use jotters for school books in Scotland, we call them your jotters. I wrote as if I was male as well, that I was always with the boys for some reason. And I had adventures in the Swiss Alps, and I had adventures in skiing, and a whole load of different things, living in igloos, catching cod. I don't know what I was reading at the time, but in my head I was having these adventures. And I grew up with a family who aren't particularly interested in snow and ice and all of this stuff, but somewhere in me there was something that was being hugely attracted to this. I see this as a privilege, it's an absolute privilege, and if the way in which I can bring the stories from Antarctica, my experience from Antarctica, back into the work that I do through sustainability, back to that global citizenship perspective, that if I can help by my understanding of this place, if I can convey the stories of this place back in a way that helps me to better understand the place in which I live at home, and help school children and others and adults and anyone else understand the importance of caring for these places, that the polar regions are sentinels for climate change. If I can help to do that in some way, then I can rationalise why I could make the commitment to come here, and the damage to come here as well, because there is the damage that comes with travelling here.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. What a beautiful note to finish on. And may we actually in time get to experience the privilege of going again, but very mindful of what we're protecting as we do so. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Sam. good morning to others. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice to see everyone.
Big hugs. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Night.
Thank you, everyone. Really, really lovely. Wow. Thank you. That's wonderful. Really appreciate that, Phoebe and Louise. That's
And now that
really,
goes out into the world recorded too to support it, which we'll obviously do.
yeah. There's lots of people who tune in later, but
Yeah.
mhm. Wow, it's so
Apologise for
interesting.
my technical issues.
Oh, it's hilarious. Just at a critical moment. Louise is frozen.
Always the way.
I'm completely brain dead. Sam, biggest of love to you, darling, and recognition for the effort and the contribution. And may we continue to voyage together.
Absolutely. We're stuck.
We are. I think so.
Okay, you're not a morning. You're not a night person. I know that about you.
Oh, not at all. Louise, thank you, darling, for coordinating this and getting everything set up and organised. It was an epic effort, and you've got such a big dance card and such a great thing to do tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Phoebe. Thank you, Sam. The podcast is amazing.
It was amazing.
You should be really proud.
Great to share. It's wonderful. Okay, we will be in touch soon, but lovely.
Have a wonderful day.
Yes, I will indeed. Bye, everyone.
Bye.